Welcome to the inside of my new storage shed, everyone. We don't have power out here yet, so I'm just working off of a drop cord light. So sorry for the poor lighting and probably the poor audio. It's very echoey in here. But this is my new storage shed and it's unfinished.
So today, hopefully, we're going to go from this junk pile to this wonderfully organized wall of lawn and garden tools.
Lord only knows how one acquires this many shovels. I'm going to try and hang them in between the studs to give them a little recess. I'm going to build little panels and cut little notches in them so that we can hang tools. This is also a good exercise to use up all your scraps. I've got some leftover shelf brackets. I've got all sorts of hardwood scraps and softwood scraps. And of course, all the tools we want to hang up. So let's get busy. I think I've got the tools roughly laid out into the stud bays where I'd like to see them. Now, some will be at different heights than others. For example, the rakes, will be way up high, and that'll leave room for tools underneath. But I think I've got them just about into the stud bays where I want. Time to make the little platforms that's gonna hold them all in place. So the first item up for grabs is gonna be just a simple block of wood. I've got this ladder here that is almost fit up against the wall, but it will fit between the roof joists. But I need a way to hold it there. You have to put it up against the wall backwards for it to fit. So I'm going to mount a piece of wood between the roof joists to hold it from falling on my head. So let's see where this needs to go. That's a bad idea. Let's do it. Big one.
This first organization job, I just happened to have a 2x4 that would fit right between the roof rafters. It was exactly the right size. Unfortunately, I didn't have a pencil in my hand, so I was just sort of using the writing on the OSB above it to align where this block of wood needed to go to hold the top of the ladder in place. And I'm using a cordless impact driver and 2-inch wood screws.
All right, block of wood won't go anywhere. Give it the dab tap, push the ladder away. Right there, baby. Ladder up against the wall, and it's not gonna fall on my head. That's wonderful. Good deal. All right, ladder's done. Many more tools to go. For my long rake, I'm gonna hang it directly in front of the stud. In order to do so, I'm just gonna create two little pieces that stick out on either side of the stud to hold it in place. And I'll show you what I'm doing.
In the spirit of using leftovers, I'm using some leftover lawn stakes here, and I'm just going to use my circular saw, and I'm going to guesstimate that they need to be about 6 inches long. So I'm going to cut both pieces off at the same size, and then it's easy. We're not designing anything, we're not following any specific plans here. We're just sort of going to go back and forth to the wall and reference the tool, hang it about where it needs to be, and guesstimate as close as we can. And then I'm just going to chamfer the ends, just cut them off so they look a little pretty when we hang them up. And with both pieces cut.
And then I'm also going to give them a notch across the top for the rake's leading edge to sit into.
You heard the man. I'm going to use the jigsaw to cut a notch across the top of both of these pieces so that the leading edge of the rake can sit down in it and hold it against the wall so it won't slide off. These tools are peculiar because none of them have flat surfaces or provisions for hanging. So you just have to find any sort of surface that you can and make it work. And in this instance, the tool has a leading metal edge that'll fit in this slot nicely. Using my speed square, I'm going to strike a line across the top of both of these, and I'm going to cut about a 3/16 of an inch notch across the top of these for the tool to sit in. And like I said, with the tools so handy, I'm going to reference that wall and that tool several times throughout the build to give me an idea of, does it look like it's fitting right? Is it in the right place? Do I need to raise it, lower it, longer, shorter, that sort of thing. It's a lot of going back and forth, but we're not following specific plans here. We're really shooting from the hip. With the two pieces cut to the right length, or what I think is the right length, and the corners knocked off so it'll look a little prettier, won't poke anybody's eye out, and the 3/16 of an inch ditch across the top. Let's give it a test fit and see what it looks like.
Just like that, so that the rake can rest in the tool holder. I think that'll be just fine.
And with the exception of the Ryobi Weed Whacker, which uses a specific screw, most of today's assembly is going to be 2-inch wood screws with pre-drilled holes.
All right, let's see what happens. All right, beautiful shot. And the rake is out of the way. One more done.
So this next stud bay, I'm going to use little brackets on the sides to hold a platform, to hold a smaller hard rake and a post hole digger, which has two handles. So what I did on this bracket or platform is use a jigsaw and a hole saw and cut a little hole for the handle of the rake and cut two slots with rounded holes for the handles on the post hole diggers. And once they're leveled and attached to the wall, we can see how it fits. So for the hard rake, with the hole for the handle to slip through, I gave it a bit of a false bottom. So you can kick the bottom of the rake out and slide the handle out of the hole. Post hole diggers just slip right into place. And they nest fairly well opposite orientation like that, albeit slightly on an angle.
Post hole digger and hard toothed rake taken care of. I think shovels are next.
Well, sort of. Actually, rakes are next, but they're going to reside in the same cubby hole, same stud bay as the shovels. They're just going to go up high and the shovels are going to go down lower. Same assembly. I'm going to use brackets on the walls or on the sides of the studs, and then I'm going to use a slotted platform to hold the rakes. The only difference is I used a little longer bracket there because the rakes won't fit into the stud bay. They won't recess into the stud bay. They're too wide. So they're going to sit flush with the front of the studs up high, and the shovels will fit in the middle. But stacking them like this, the shovel bracket is not only going to need a slot for the shovel handles, it's also going to need a slot for these rake handles that are going to hang down below the level of the shovel head. There's the two slots in question. And so the rake handles, when pushed into place, will sit to the right of the shovels, and then the shovels should stack up just fine. And again, these are tools with no real easy way to mount or hang them. I've tried hooks in the past. I've tried all sorts of various designer wall systems and that sort of stuff, and I always wind up not having the right style hook to hang these things. So designing these slots yourself by literally just holding the shovel up to the piece of wood and outlining how wide the handle is and how wide your slot needs to be, this works out really, really well. And then you just choose your height, make sure all of your tools are nesting well inside of that one stud bay, and screw them to the walls. Now the shovels being a little heavier, I did add a little cut down 2x4s to the bottom of this bracket because some of this soft pine pre-primed whitewood from the big box stores is pretty soft and it breaks pretty easy. So I did add some 2x4 brackets underneath the shovel shelf.
I just want to acquire so many shovels. Amazing.
Next up is going to be the flat shovels, and I'm just going to copy the design of the regular shovels out of the scrap primed 1x8. Now remember, we're not following any plans here, so I'm literally just holding it up to the tool, marking how wide the handle is and where sort of the shoulders of the shovel might fit. I've also laid the flat shovels into the stud bay. I want them in about where I would like them to hang. I have several flat shovels that are similarly sized and have one shorter, narrower flat shovel. And so I'm going to separate those two and have them nesting in opposite directions, similar to the rakes. And to do this process, I'm using my speed square and a pencil just to draw out where the slots need to be on the 1x8. And I'm also going to use this shelf to hang these clippers. To get an idea of cutting a hole for the clippers, I'm just going to use one of the handles of the clippers to draw a circle on the platform, and that should be a large enough hole for me to mount the clippers on the shelf, pointy end down, so the blade should be able to slip into this hole when we're done. So using the skill saw, I'm going to cut it to the appropriate length to fit between the stud bays, and then I'm going to partially cut out the slots for the handles of the shovels, and then I'm going to use the jigsaw to round the ends of the slots and to cut a circle hole for the handles of the shears. With the slot cut for the shovels, we'll give it a little test fit real quick, make sure it fits between the studs just fine, and make sure that the shovel fits fine. Back on the sawhorses, I'm going to use the skill saw and the jigsaw and some screws to create some brackets, some support underneath out of these scrap 2x4s. And we'll just cut them off at angles, and we'll assemble a sort of a Triton spear looking support bracket underneath. With the flat shovel shelf securely mounted to the studs, I'm going to use a standard 2x4 for the single flat shovel shelf. And I'm just going to mark the width between the studs there, use my speed square as a guide to cut it so it'll fit between the studs. And then I'm just going to hold it up to the remaining flat shovel to mark where the handle needs to go, to cut a little slot for that handle. And then for the handles that are going to be right beside it, they're going to need to pass by this shelf as well because they're going to hang lower than the shelf. I'm just going to use the shelf above it to trace where the slot needs to go. Then I'm going to use the jigsaw and the skill saw to cut that out and hang it on the wall at the appropriate height using the same 2-inch screws. And with the last shovel hanging in place, it looks like we've got hard rakes, soft rakes, post hole diggers, pointy shovels, and flat shovels all taken care of. Looking good so far. Next in line is this Ryobi convertible weed whacker edger, and it's got a slot for a screw. So all I'm going to do here, since I'm using a 2x4 as my little platform to mount it to the wall, I'm going to trace the shape of the weed whacker out and sort of partially recess it into the stud bay using the jigsaw. And then once that's done, I'll pre-drill the hole and I'll sink a screw that fits in, the screw head fits into the slot on the back of that Ryobi, and I'll sink that screw almost flush, leaving just enough sticking out to catch the slot on the back of the Ryobi. And after a couple of test fits and some minor adjustments, we'll attach it to the studs like all the rest of these brackets and call it done. Well, not quite done. It is a convertible weed whacker, so it's got an attachment. It's got 2 attachments, so when one's not in use, it has 1 attachment that needs to go somewhere. So I'm just sort of holding it up against the wall and trying to figure out what's a good location to house either the weed whacker attachment or the edger attachment. And I'm just going to use another 2x4 for this bracket, only I'm going to mount it upright so that there's space behind the stud, and I'm just going to let it slide. I'm going to let the tool slide in behind the stud to hold it in place. Once I did all that, I realized it was hanging a little crooked and sort of falling into the studs, so I did wind up adding a second 2x4.
Occasionally, you'll put something on the wall and then decide later it wasn't right, or you'll need to add something to it. So in this case, where I have the weed eater hanging and its attachment hanging, I'd really like to put this bush trimmer on there as well. So I'm going to mark it where the blade's going to go. I'm going to cut out a little hole back here to allow that to slide in it, and it'll rest on the block. All right. Now get it in there, resting on the block. Again, since this is an exercise in using up all of my leftover and scrap materials I have laying around, I have a couple extra prefab hooks. I'm going to give it a try on some harder to hang pickaxes and stuff.
Those heavy pickaxes are up out of the way, so that leaves this little piece of wood here with one slot and several holes drilled into it. Again, I was just using hole saws and jigsaws here, and I'm going to use little brackets for the mounting to mount it to the studs. But this is just going to hold my lightweight pole saw and a couple of attachments there, and possibly even a set of garden shears. And for this set of pruners or loppers or whatever you want to call them, I'm just going to stick a screw on the face of one of the studs up high so it's out of the way. It's kind of behind my ladder, but out of the way to hang these up. And for the assortment of pickaxes, mauls, and sledgehammers, I'm just going to use 2 short pieces of 2x4s from either side to leave a hole in the middle so that these can be leaned up against the wall and won't fall away and fall on my feet. So I got most of what I wanted hung up on this first wall of the shed. I've got a few odds and ends, poles and extra broom handles and whatnot behind my ladder there that aren't real secure, but the rest of it is tucked away nicely in between the studs and accessible. And more importantly, they have a home. So rather than collecting tools in a corner or in a junk pile, these will always have a place to return to where they belong when they're done being used. I hope you enjoyed watching the video as much as I enjoyed making it. It's been a lot of fun, sort of shooting from the hip and not following plans, and it seems to have turned out okay this time. Stay tuned for more videos when we turn our attention to a loft in the back half of this, or I guess I should say back third of this shed, and we're going to do some shelves and a planting area in the other corner. Thanks for watching.